Hello everyone, my name is Laura and this is my channel Languages with Laura, and today I'm going to do another little introduction video. I've had a lot of new subscribers recently, which has been absolutely wonderful. I love reading all of your comments of where you are in your language learning journey and everything like that, so I thought I'd do another more up-to-date video of who I am and kind of this channel, because the first one that I did at the very beginning of this channel, which was over a year ago, I believe. Yeah, over a year ago. So I thought I would just do an updated, like, hello, how are you? This is me. So let's go. So first things first is I did not really grow up with parents who were super interested in language or culture. They are both Midwest American parents, and that was the culture I grew up with. My mom is Dutch and my dad is German and Scots-Irish, and heritage is very important to me, and I do love learning about the cultures of my heritage. We kind of grew up in more this like typical American culture, white American culture, rather than any other actual culture. I mean, I did get a lot of influences of Dutch culture growing up a little bit, but again, it's that Americanized Dutch cultures. You know, we have like the blue and white china decoration in the house, and just other little like influences of Dutch culture here and there, but not enough to actually know much about Dutch culture. And so my interest for language and culture did not really stem from my parents. My dad, actually, I love telling this story, but my dad had to be exempt from a language learning requirement in high school in order to graduate, because he truly tried so hard to learn Spanish, but it wouldn't click for him. So he had to be exempt from that requirement in order to graduate. And my mom just didn't really have an interest, didn't really grow up with anything like that. So my start for language learning and culture was truly through school, and was truly through one other very unique experience I had growing up that did actually kind of stem from my parents, and that was hosting international students. So I was one of those kids growing up that I actually loved my Spanish class. Believe it or not, I had so much fun. I thought learning Spanish was a lot of fun. I had a very easy time learning Spanish. My first Spanish teacher was from Mexico. My second one was from Puerto Rico. And so I was very fortunate to have native speakers very early on in my education. We were also required to learn Spanish starting in first grade. So that was another thing that probably helped, with that it was just a part of my curriculum, first grade through 8th grade. And I just loved it. I had a great time. And then when I was 7, my parents hosted their first international student, and he was from Korea. And so that was kind of the first taste of culture outside of classroom that I ever really had, and it was great. I mean, I was that kid, I was constantly asking him, you know, how do you say this in Korean? And how do you do this in Korea? And like, I mean, I was 7, so a lot of very basic cultural questions, but I just loved it. He couldn't care less. I mean, I was a 7-year-old and he was in high school, so because he was the same age as my older brother. And so they had junior and senior year of high school together. And then when I hit high school, I decided I was going to learn French. And so I actually stopped taking Spanish class and I started taking French, and I loved it, of course. I had a very naive idea behind choosing French over Spanish. My idea was that my older sister had taken French in high school, and so I thought we could speak French together. She didn't remember any of her French from high school, because for her that was over 10 years ago, by the time I was entering into high school. So it was a very naive idea, and it did not pan out in the way that I wanted it to, but that's okay, because I decided to stick with French anyway, because I really enjoyed learning the language. However, when I was a sophomore in high school, my school had a kind of school trip that was open to all students to sign up. They had a bunch of different trips. They had this thing called Winterim, where it's 2 weeks after Christmas break in January to do irregular classes or an internship or go on a short-term travel thing. And I had been working for almost 2 years, and I was saving up money so that I could go on a trip. And the trip that I could afford was to the Dominican Republic. Now, pause on this. I started learning French, and immediately I sat there and I was like, oh my word, I do miss Spanish though. I miss being in a Spanish classroom. I miss speaking the language. So that's when I actually started with Duolingo. By the way, video is not sponsored by anybody or anything. So anything that I mention in here is not sponsored at all. It's just my personal opinion and experience. So, continuing on with my life story a little bit. So I'd been doing Spanish on Duolingo just because I missed it and I kind of wanted to keep up with it. I didn't want to forget it, even though I'd been focusing on French. So I went on the trip to the Dominican Republic, and I was kind of one of 3 people on the entire trip who was confident enough in their Spanish skills to actually use their Spanish on this trip. And I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. I haven't taken Spanish in almost 2 years, and yet I'm speaking better than somebody who is in a level 5 Spanish class, which was the highest level at my high school. Like, they refused to talk because they felt like they didn't know the language. And I'm sitting here like, this is absolutely ridiculous. So I got back from the 2 weeks in the Dominican Republic, which was also the first time I had ever been outside of the country, which for a lot of Americans, when you travel outside of the United States for the first time, it's either to Canada or Mexico. So the fact that mine was the Dominican Republic, I don't know, it just made me so happy. And I loved it. I had the best experience on that trip. Anyway, I got back and I talked to the Spanish department. I was like, I want to get back into Spanish classes, but I don't want to be put in Spanish 101. Like, I know the alphabet, I know the basics, I know conjugation. I need to get back into a class. So they put me in Spanish 3. And so my junior year in high school, I was in Spanish and French classes. Now, when it came to deciding the schedule for senior year, there was a little bit of, I need to figure out what I'm going to do with my life, as well as what school I'm going to go to for college, and also what my senior year is going to look like. And when I got to my schedule, I kind of had, 4 open slots, because I think you were only required to take 2 years of language, but I knew I wanted to do way more than that. So one of the slots was going to be French, one of the slots was going to be Spanish, and then I had 2 more open slots. And then I would also have a study hall on top of that, so not worried about it. And so I decided to look at the other language departments that my high school offered. They had gotten rid of Latin, so I was too late for that. I had heard bad things about the German department, which, reflecting back on it now, I think it was the people I was hearing it from were not necessarily the people to trust in terms of what a good language class is like, because they were my friends who just didn't like school, period. And they didn't like the teaching methods of this teacher, but again, looking back on it, I probably would have been fine. But I don't regret not choosing German. But the only other language class that my high school offered actually was Mandarin. And Mandarin, it was in its, I think, 2nd or 3rd year at the high school. It was a very new program, 1 teacher, kind of like 1 class a day. Everybody was in that same class. And so I thought, yeah, I will take Mandarin for sure. Because I had also wanted to learn Mandarin because, another detail I forgot to mention, when I was a freshman in high school, we started hosting international students again. And so when I was a freshman, when I was my first year in high school, we had an international student from China who was also a freshman, and her American name was Alice. And she actually ended up living with us all 4 years, and so we are the same age. We graduated together, and so she was like my sister. And I had the chance to meet her family. We actually went on an East Coast tour of the United States with her mom, dad, and brother, and they didn't speak any English, so poor Alice had to do all of the translating. But it really kind of sparked I want to learn Mandarin to communicate with her and her family better. Even though she was in the States, to study English and everything, I was like, if I ever do something with her family again, I don't want her to be stuck in a position of constantly translating, because that is tiring. So when my senior year came around and I had an open spot, I realized Mandarin. I can take Mandarin finally. So I did that. And then the other class, I decided to do a dual enrollment program at the community college nearby so I could get started on college credits as a senior in high school. And so I was kind of choosing between either doing Greek at one school or Arabic at another school. And so, of course, what does high schooler me do? I turn to my best friend and I say, "Which do you think I should take?" And she said, "You should take Greek because Arabic is going to be too hard and you'll probably fail the class." So I took Arabic. I took that as a challenge and I signed up to do Arabic at the community college. And I loved it. I loved both the Mandarin class and I loved the Arabic class. My Mandarin class is it's thanks to that teacher that I actually like tea because she forced us to drink it every Friday. Even though I was saying like, oh, I don't like tea, she'd be like, well, it's a small cup. You just drink one little cup of tea and then you don't have to have any more. And then as the semester goes on, drinking a cup of tea every Friday turned into drinking 2 cups of tea and then maybe even 3. And I ended up learning to love especially black tea because she would bring it from China whenever she went back to visit, and it was just a great experience. And now I actually have a European couple who are friends of ours, and every time we go over there for tea, they always are like, "Oh, you're so weird, you don't drink like milk or honey or sugar in your tea." And I'm like, I know, I'm sorry, that's not how I like my tea. I like it just plain black. Anyway, and so my senior year, I was taking 4 languages. So at this point, I knew I wanted to do something with language. And I graduated. And then I actually took a gap year before going into university, which was not very common at the time, at least not in my high school. And I taught English in Kyrgyzstan. And so we were there for a year. It was me and one other person, and that's where I started to learn Russian because I was there on a student visa, so I was enrolled in the school as a Russian student. One of the English teachers was teaching us Russian, and then because of that, I had full ability to teach English classes, lead English clubs, lead events, etc. and so forth. And so that's what I did. I taught a TOEFL preparation course, which I kind of got dumped on me very randomly in the middle of the year. And I was not prepared because native English speakers like myself, we don't actually have to take the TOEFL. It is not a requirement for us because we are native English speakers. We speak it in the home and we did our education through it. And so when I was handed this TOEFL preparation course, I had no idea what to do because I had never studied the TOEFL before. I had never needed to pay attention to it at all. So I had to do a lot of research to be able to lead this class of these kids who were like, "What was your experience with the TOEFL?" And I was like, "What's your experience with the Russian language exam?" None. So I spent that year learning Russian, and it was very interesting because my teacher's priority was to teach us vocabulary. Like, she did not teach us a single thing about Russian cases or grammar. To her, it was, we need to survive, and by doing that, we need to learn words, which super fair because even, we spoke everything in the accusative case, everything. And it was fine. People were still thinking that I was ethnically Russian because it was Kyrgyzstan, it was Central Asia, so 90% of the time if you see a white person walking down the street, they are probably Russian, which is a very fair assumption, but it is an assumption. And so when I would say like, "Нет, я американка, я американский, я не знаю русский, я не понимаю русский," they just would not believe me because I'm telling them in Russian that I don't understand Russian. But they also didn't speak English, so it was my broken Russian and their Russian. So it was a super great experience because of that. And so my Russian was very communicable, but not academic at all whatsoever because I didn't know any grammar. I just translated English sentences, subject, verb, object, and just used Russian words instead. So that was my year abroad, and that was the second time I had ever been out of the country. Since then, I have traveled a lot more, and I'll get into that very shortly. But then I started at university, And the first university I went to, I was there for 2 years. I was an Asian and Middle Eastern Studies concentrated in Arabic major. So I was taking more Arabic courses, and then I was kind of bouncing with having a Spanish minor, a French minor, a Russian minor, and a translation minor, which yes, having 4 minors is insane, but I was only going to have 3, and I initially started off with a Spanish and Portuguese minor, but then switched to French because I found that the Spanish department was not challenging. They didn't have a lot of investment into their students, and so, you know, I'm sitting there in this Spanish business class and I'm like falling asleep because it's so easy and so boring, and so I switched to French. And I couldn't stand the French department. I had a lot of issues with them because for me, my motivation learning French was that my partner was actually from West Africa and they spoke French. And all of the French professors at this university, they were all from France, and we very much rubbed sides with opinions of what is academic French. Like, I remember, like, they would say some things that were just like borderline racist against Francophone countries that were not white, and I did not like that. And then I had this major project that I had to do, and the topic that I chose was Francophone African literature. And my professor was like, this is not an academic topic. You know, you're not gonna have anything to talk about. You're gonna get a bad grade. Like, don't do this. And I was like, no, you're wrong, and I'm gonna do this because African literature in French is a beautiful thing. It should be celebrated, and I want to do it. It's the topic that's important to me, and it does follow all the guidelines for this assignment. So I did do it, and they did grade me fairly, but they were not very happy about it. And so I had a hard time with that department. And then the cherry on top of all of this was that the translation department, I was told we would be the last class to graduate with the translation minor in our degrees. And then the next semester, partway through the semester, they actually dropped the entire program, and they said your class now has to switch from being a translation course to an independent study course, and you will not get the translation minor. You know, we will offer no more courses, etc. and so forth. And that was kind of the whole reason why I chose the school, was so that I could study translation specifically, and then also Arabic and Russian, because not a lot of American schools offer those. Most American schools offer French, Spanish, and German. And so I was very disappointed, and we had moved to a different state, and my partner still had 2 more years to go on his undergraduate degree. So I actually worked full-time for a couple of years, and I started working in a German bakery. And that's where I kind of started up with German a little bit. I mean, I was very happy to start up with German, but I wasn't officially doing it. It was just kind of the owner and the head of the bakery was from Germany, and then the person working up front was also from Germany, and so you would just hear it all the time, right? And so that was what was like, okay, maybe it's time for me to learn German. So I worked there, but then when my partner graduated, we moved back to our home state, and I started up at school again because I want to get my undergraduate. So the school, I'm almost done, I promise, with like just my life story and background of language. So the school that I'm currently at, I'm going to graduate in the spring, and I'm going to be an English major and Spanish translation minor. As soon as I had applied to the school, I'd been accepted and deferred my enrollment until we were able to move back to the home state. And as soon as I got there, they informed me that their translation program was no longer available. So of course, I was heartbroken, and I became an English major because that was the second largest number of credits that I had, and I had just enough that would allow me to graduate still within a 4-year time frame, even though I had a 2-year break in between. So I became an English major, and I talked with the Spanish department, and we were able to figure out a way to grandfather me into the Spanish translation department. Because I had translation credits from the previous university that could transfer. And they had one more interpretation course, actually, and it was a Spanish medical interpretation course, so I took that, and that was so much fun. I absolutely adored it. And it was very much a skills focusing class, and that was fantastic. So then I talked to the head of the department. They were like, okay, you just need like one more class that we can actually give you a Spanish translation minor. And so that I'm going to be doing next semester. It's actually going to be an independent study where I'm just doing a translation project, and I'm focusing on Indigenous voices in Latin America and North America, translating from Spanish to English and English to Spanish. So I'm going to get my Spanish translation minor this spring when I graduate. Huzzah! But I am only taking Spanish classes in college right now just because I am trying to graduate, period. And they don't have a lot of French and German courses, and I just don't have the time in my schedule to take them, even if they did have them. So everything, all of my languages are self-study except for Spanish. Right now I am taking that officially through school. So yeah, I do a lot of self-study, but it is very rooted in the fact that I've taken almost every language that I've ever learned in school at some point. German is the only language that I am learning that I have never actually taken an official course in school for. So it is kind of my first true like self-study language. And everything else I've been able to just like keep going with the textbooks that I got from being required in school or using school resources and things like that. So a huge thing that helps keep me motivated to keep studying these languages is travel. My parents have continued to host international students ever since I graduated from high school. They've had like 7 or 8 students at this point, so it's like gaining 7 or 8 new siblings, which is really, really fun, really cool. But I have been very fortunate in that I've been able to travel, even though my partner and I are both college students, and we have been literally ever since we got married, we've still somehow been able to travel to 19 different countries. And I am very much the person who does all the like language learning so that we can communicate when we travel. Not that I've learned the language of every place that we traveled. Like I did not learn Hungarian, I did not learn Czech, I haven't learned Dutch, etc. and so forth. So we have been to 19 different countries. Our goal is to make it to every continent. So for Antarctica, I would like to just do a cruise because I have no real motivation to go to Antarctica other than to make it to the 7th continent. We have made it to 5 out of the 7 continents. We just need Oceania, so that's like Australia, New Zealand, Peloponnesian Islands. So hopefully, you know, at some point we will make it over there, but I'm also applying for PhD programs in anthropology right now, so we will see how that goes. Very like linguistic anthropology, sociocultural anthropology, so we'll see how that goes. And then the only other language that I haven't mentioned that I do have experience with actually is Wolof. So Wolof is an endangered language in West Africa, and we went to Senegal my partner was there for 2 months, I was there for a month and a half. And when we were there, we took Wolof language courses because he was doing a program that pays him to learn Wolof. And I was doing it because it's a lot of fun and I wanted to. And then that way I could also help him study because my partner speaks English, French. He doesn't really speak Russian. He kind of gave up on his Russian studies when we were in Kyrgyzstan. And so Wolof now because he's in class. But his first language was actually Hausa, was actually Jiram, the dialect of Hausa. But he doesn't really speak it much anymore, but his dad does, so yeah. So I'm also a little bit on a mission to try and find some good resources for learning Hausa for him, because I know that he would love to pick it up again one day. And kind of go back to what was his original first language, and then his first language was Hausa, and then it was French, and now it's English. So, but we do speak in French together, which is pretty awesome in my opinion. So, I think that's really everything. I mean, yeah, there's my life story. My background with language comes from school, international students, and then travel experience. If you want me to make another video about my travel experience and how I was able to afford to travel to 19 different countries as a college student on a very tight budget, I will happily do that. If you want to know how to travel on a tight budget, I will happily make that video. And yeah, I know this entire video was in English rather than in each of the languages that I study. I could have done it where I talked about my Spanish journey in Spanish and everything like that, but I wanted this to be just a casual sit down. Everybody can just kind of focus and just get to know me a little bit better. So yeah, I don't know why language learning really captured my interest so strongly, or why culture captured my interest so strongly. That's just what happened, and so I love connecting with people in a way that makes them feel comfortable talking to them in their native language or in a language that's more comfortable than English. That's just what I want to do. So thank you all very much for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe. I'm trying to post a video every week, but because it is getting to the end of the semester, I am getting very busy with exams and projects and papers and things like that. So I'm not going to be super consistent with my posting, but as soon as like I get on break, hopefully it'll be a lot better. So hit the subscribe so you get notified when I do post a video, and hit the bell so that you actually get like the notification and everything. And I have other social media linked down below that is focused on my travels and things like that. So you can follow me like on Instagram and things. And I think that's everything. So thank you for watching, and until I see you in the next video, bye!